Dear presidents, dear foreign ministers, dear members of parliament, panelists, friends and comrades, at this Cumbre in the European Parliament, history proceeds in waves, and I think it's important to understand the movement of history. The unipolar era under the dominance of the United States is coming to an end, and the future belongs to multilateral relations between countries and peoples with mutual respect and reciprocity without outside political or military interference. And we all know, as the movement of history continues, some cling to the certainties of the old world going down. And for some European forces, respect and reciprocity are still difficult concepts. A senior European Union diplomat told Euronews last week, quote, "It seems that the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean want to be seen as equal partners," unquote. Literally. A high diplomat of the European Union last week, not 50 years ago, last week. It seems that they want to be seen as equal partners. And so it is this neo-colonial attitude that still haunts the minds of old forces. A number of diplomats, government leaders and forces in Europe have not seen or have not wanted to see the changes in the world. They failed to see how the illegal war against Iraq in 2003 definitely undermined the credibility of the United States as a so-called leader of the world. They failed to see how in 2008 the financial crisis undermined the credibility of the Western financial institutions, and rightly so. They failed to see how the rest of the world reacts differently to the war in Ukraine than the West. And I do not mean the issue of condemning Russian invasion, which is a violation of international law. I'm talking about the sanctions, economic sanctions, embargo, shutting down the SWIFT interbank system and freezing the central bank reserves. And everyone knows that all those sanctions can be used against other countries tomorrow and are in fact already used today against countries we're thinking about, among others, the criminal embargo and a blockade against Cuba. And recently, I will close with that, Fiona Hill, who is a former staff member of the Security Council in the United States, she said about the vote of the countries in the United Nations against the sanctions, that is nothing else as mutiny, she said. It is mutiny. So they call it mutiny that countries and peoples want to make their own decisions about their own resources. They called it mutiny that countries and peoples refuse to take sides in a new Cold War or a trade war that's forced upon them from Washington. They call it mutiny that the unipolar era of the United States is quietly coming to an end. Well, if that is mutiny, let's embrace the mutiny of the global South, because it is on the right wave of history, comrades. And so we are in Brussels. But in Brussels, there is not only the European Parliament, there is another Brussels, there is another Belgium, there is another Europe, and there is mutiny in Europe too. There are people suffering in Europe from inflation and poverty, and there is a class struggle in Europe going up and down like waves of the sea. And if we can get the mutiny of the North to lend a hand to the mutiny of the South, and vice versa, we can turn the world around in a democratic, social and ecological direction the planet needs. So, viva el respeto, la amistad y la solidaridad entre los pueblos. Viva el motín. Long live mutiny. I thank you.